Welcome to season 2, episode 2 of EsaysPsays, your weekly dose of Black love. My name is Ellen for the E.
And my name is Paul for P. For those of you tuning in for the first time, we decided to start this podcast to celebrate a milestone in our relationship. As of 4/22/25, we will be married for 36 years. Each week, we'll share a part of our relationship with you so you can see what has brought us this far and what will take us even further.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And a brief moment for a mock minute. Hey, Paul, what are you grateful for this week?
Well, this week I'm grateful that I woke up and my head is above ground and I was able to work with my students this week and help them achieve their goals as they work toward graduation.
Well, that's wonderful. I see you didn't say you're grateful for me, the best thing in your life. But anywho,
Well, of
I
course, dear, of course. I'm grateful for you, honey.
well, I'm grateful that I have the privilege to work with my spouse on many projects that we have been doing and are doing with this podcast. I know a lot of people don't have that ability to work with their partners, so I'm glad that we have that. And though we have our moments, we can come back together. And I'm also grateful for our sons. They give us a lot of material on the podcast and off. All righty. Well, thank you so much for that pause for the moment. And this week, as speaking of our children, we will be discussing parenting and how we individually knew that each kid would be able to make it in this world. Because we all know raising children is a job.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
It can be a rewarding one, but there are times.
And I must reiterate, there are and were times. Okay. As my wife was saying, we have two firstborn children because they are 9 years apart. However, they are totally different individuals. They have a lot in common, but they also have things that are totally separate from each other, which gives them their personalities. And we also had the pleasure of raising some bonus children. I call them nephews, and a couple of them are, and the others are second cousins. So to not make a distinction, I had them all call us Uncle Paul and Auntie Ellen.
Although I am sure most of you know our kids from our episodes where we discuss them, we will refer to them as Son 1 and Son 2. Well, Son 1 was a big surprise. We got married in April of 1989, and I was pregnant by September. And I know a lot of you will say that A leads to B. LOL. Well, I was having issues with my birth control. Since I had been taking it for many years, Paul suggested that I stop and we should have time to locate another method before anything substantial could happen. Well, as you can see, someone showed up. And on the first doctor's appointment, the OBGYN laughed at us. He said that birth control is out of your system the cycle after you stop taking it. I remember there was no Google, internet, or even Ask Jeeves at the time. It was 1989.
Yes, 1989, and we both were very young. So we didn't really know what we were talking about, what we were doing.
So shortly before having Son 1, Paul had taken the federal test and was on the list. He was only temporary at his current job and awaiting the permanent offer. He wanted Son 1 and I to relocate to New York City so he would have a better job prospects, and since he did not drive, it would be easier to get to work.
Yes, I didn't drive at that time. I figured it would be easier to get around on train. Living in Los Angeles, I had to take the bus back and forth to work. It
However,
was tough.
I loved LA and still do. It is my dream living place. Since Paul grew up there, for him, not so much. He loves New York, and growing up there, I love it too, but the cold I could miss. However, one discussion we did have in the beginning of our marriage was whomever made the most money made the decision where the family would live. So at the time, Paul made the most money. So once I was done convalescing after having someone, I was off to New York. One nice thing was my younger brother came to visit for a few weeks before I left. So I got to do touristy things before I left to stay in my childhood home for a bit with my parents. I was happy to be home. I had not seen some of my family for almost 2 years. So it was nice to reunite.
And I was actually relieved when they were on their way to New York, even though I missed both of them terribly. But I thought we would have better prospects to New York City. And also, I thought we would have more help as far as with Ryan, or with him being so small.
Yes, at the time son one was only I think 3 months
Yes.
when we
Yeah,
moved
he was
to
only 3 months.
New
He was a
York.
young little thing. He
Yeah,
was
he was.
born June.
Yeah, and we
Or
moved to August.
right.
Yes, no, he
He was
was
less than
just
3 months.
yeah, he was almost 3 months.
Yep.
Well, unfortunately, as what happens, a temporary situation turned permanent. I was hoping that Paul would be offered his training in Glencoe so we could return to LA.
And that's Glencoe, Georgia, for those of you who don't know.
However, life happened, and a week to the day I returned home, I got the news that my father would never be returning. And if that was not enough, I had to call Paul at his work and tell him 3 times. He said he thought there was something wrong with son one, so he could not comprehend what I was saying.
Yes, initially I thought she was talking about Ryan, but as she continued to keep telling me, I did figure it out that it was my father-in-law that had been hurt. Um, so it was very tough, of course, on everyone.
So, within a week of starting the relocation process, I was picking up my husband from the airport and preparing for a funeral. Thank goodness for son one, otherwise, I'm not sure I would have been able to get through the experience. Once the services were over and my father was buried in his family plot, I was headed back to the airport so Paul could return home, meaning Los Angeles. His intention was to stay and make some money till he got a federal offer or they sent him to training. I have learned now that his mother in law requested he return because his family needed him. Though it may have been true, I would have been fine and living back in LA by the end of the year because he was on the list to be sent for training.
Yes, that is true, but ultimately, things I think worked out for the best at that particular time. Though my
Whatever.
wife didn't agree, as you can hear
Whatever.
from her
I did not like
attitude.
the earthquakes, but if anybody has been to Los Angeles, the weather and the space and the shopping, yes, New York is great shopping, but it's just the space. I mean, Del Amo Mall is huge. You could go into Del Amo on a Monday if they had it open 24 hours and not leave till Sunday. That's how big that mall is.
So what happened once I returned to
So
LA, Allie?
once you return to Los Angeles, he would place our home items in storage and have them shipped to New York. He resigned from his position and returned back to the city. Shortly after his return, he was offered a position in the federal government, and we moved into my aunt's apartment that she vacated because she finally moved down the street from my childhood home. My childhood dream was always having my aunt live down the street from us, and now I was moving away. This particular aunt was I considered my second mother, the one that gave love, cuddles, and encouragement, big hugs, and great food.
Yes, oh my goodness, the food. Let me tell you, Aunt Clarinne, I miss her every day. Not just because of the food, but because of her beautiful smile, and she was always so kind. to me. And but I will always remember the different times that we would spend Christmas at our home or Thanksgiving, and how we would travel back and forth from Maryland to, or from the other side of town to enjoy the holidays. So very good memories.
I know you are wondering what all this has to do with parenting. Well, I just wanted to give some backstory. So, fast forward 2 years, and we moved from our aunt's apartment back to my dad's office, which had been converted back to a house. While there, I would assist my mother and my aunt with the family business. My husband was settling into his position and enjoying it. I was adjusting to being a mom. I would also help my aunt with paperwork at the church she attended and work in their offices. As son one was growing through the years, I would become stressed over him not meeting milestones. Though I never thought my son had any deficiencies, and when we were together, we were fine. However, there were several times my husband would come home and I would be reduced to tears. One of the times was that he was not talking. Of course, I thought nothing of it because we had our own language.
Well, of course, he thought nothing of it because he understood certain things, nonverbal things that he would do, or signals that he would give her. But he wasn't speaking to me, so I was definitely concerned. But he always had eyes where his eyes would always be moving around the room. Anytime I would watch him, and he was very observant. So he always knew more than what he let on.
Unfortunately, there were major repairs needed to my dad's office and it was not energy efficient. So we relocated to New Jersey. Prior to relocating, my son completed daycare and made the transition to kindergarten. It was not mandatory at the time. However, we figured that it would help him get a leg up on his education. After daycare, we sent him to a Catholic school not too far from our home in Brooklyn. Unfortunately, that only lasted a month. Because son one was so used to his freedom of daycare, it was difficult for him to transition to kindergarten. So we tried an out of area public school. This was another journey because until then, we did not realize how the lack of racial diversity had impacted him. For for example, the school being in Greenwich Village had more of a racial mix of children, and like most of the children living in that neighborhood, what my child was curious when it came to observable differences, i.e., racial, hair, texture, and facial shapes and tones. He would look at them in the classroom and attempt to touch their hair and skin. We want to remind you that our son was in kindergarten. For this, the school attempted to place our son in special education, a self-contained classroom. However, it was not the structured special education process it is now. It was more of a holding area, and we did not want him in that type of educational environment. We fought extremely hard to make sure this would not happen to our son. To prevent the special education placement, we struck a deal that Paul would be at school for recess and a little after to keep an eye on son one and his behaviors.
And I was fortunate that I had a job where I went out in the field. So I had a field job, and I would visit clients. And usually, a lot of times, some of the clients that I had were near um, Ryan's school. So a lot of times I could go to a client and then go to a school and then just watch him and make sure that everything was going okay. And then also to protect him as well. I didn't want any kind of false accusations or anything like that going on. So I did that for almost 6 months, Ellen?
Yeah, almost
Yeah.
6 months. Yeah. During this time, unfortunately, I became ill and thought I wasn't going to make it. So my husband was in charge of making sure that someone was okay. Since we did not want him in special ed, they said that one of us would need to come during lunch to make sure that someone behaved. That lasted for a while. However, once we finally made the move to New Jersey, it was not sustainable. So it was me and my little man once again. We watched his educational videos, PBS, went on walks, and made new friends. It was really nice to be just a mom for a bit.
And I could see the difference in Ryan with him being with his mother like that. and it seemed like his behaviors began to change.
So once we were settled, I was just sitting around taking a break from some household activity when someone was either eating, playing, or watching TV. However, he came upstairs and said to me that he wanted to go back to school. So we sat down and talked. I let him know that if he misbehaved, that I would have to remove him from school and he would be home with me. He said he understood. I know a lot of people think that 5-year-olds cannot comprehend. However, son one completely understood. I let him know that I would talk to his dad once he came home and we would see.
And when I came home, and Ellen told me that Ryan said he wanted to go back to school, I was actually quite pleased and relieved because that lets me know that he's been paying attention, that he was not as slow as everybody thought, that he was observable, that he actually understood, that he was present, that he knew what was happening. He knew he wasn't in school, and he knew why he wasn't in school. So I was pleasantly surprised when he said to his mom that he wanted to go back to school.
Since dad did not have an issue, I registered him in the public school, which was right up the street. Fortunately, there was a great kindergarten teacher, and by the end of the school year, son one was ready to move forward to first grade. However, in the interim, he caught the worst case of ringworm ever. He had to take a liquid, and we had to use a special shampoo for a while. The teacher said it was because a lot of the kids' coats were not clean for the winter, and it probably got passed that way. After that, there was no way he was attending first grade in that school. Since there was a Catholic school down the street, we chose to send him there for first grade.
Yes, and it was really an unfortunate incident because I actually liked the public school that he was attending, and I really loved that teacher. She was very patient with Ryan, and she was patient with me too as being his father because I was very nervous about him going back to school. And she told me that she would work with him, and she did. She did that. She did what she promised me she would do, and she would help him get acclimated. And if I'm not mistaken, this was probably around what, January, February.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
went to the second half
yeah,
of
the
school.
second half of the school year, and she really worked with him. And I think because of the type of work she did with him, I think that's what helped him transition to Catholic school there in New Jersey. But go ahead, Heather.
All right, so during our time in Jersey, I became healthier and got back to work. We found a great daycare for our son one to attend after school and in the summer. And while there, we became friends with one of his teachers, and we are still friends to this day. As a matter of fact, we owe him and his family a visit. Once back to work, I was able to use my cousin's travel agent, and we went to Disney World. Well, we went to Orlando, lol. Though it was September, it was hot as hell, and on the day we planned to go to Disney, son one just wanted to stay in the pool, relax, and eat. So that is what we did. However, we did have a good time. He met Shamu.
Yes, he loved going to SeaWorld. He really enjoyed it. And he was very excited about doing that and seeing the different animals and stuff like that. So he had a great time.
Upon returning from our summer vacation, son one started first grade. Fortunately, this time he was a better student, and he was doing quite well, we thought. Though we read and talked to someone like a little man instead of a baby, we found out that the first parent teacher conference, the son one was a little behind in reading. He was doing fine in his other subjects. Thankfully, I dealt with some reading issues myself, so I was ready. I went to the school store and got him some workbooks and helped him with vowel sounds. It was like me being six all over again. However, it all paid off. By the end of the school year, son one was all caught up.
And yes, he worked extremely hard. But I do remember one incident where uh, my friend, Mr. Rice, and me and him were in the house. My wife was at work at the time. I was at work. And I really had Ryan on a real strict schedule. So I would pick him up. He would come in, take a shower, do his homework, and then have dinner. And so I remember one time, and he said to me, because we were still having him work on those workbooks when he would come out of the daycare, and he would say, "Daddy, I'm not in college." So he said, "I'm still a kid, still a kid. But one thing Mr. Rice told me, and I'll still remember it to this day. He said, how can you work a black kid too hard? And I said, what? He said, how can you? What do you don't be overly concerned about him complaining about you working him too hard. You're not working him too hard. He needs the skills, and he made me stay on the same uh, path as my wife. We had to be on one accord. He said, you have to be on one accord with your wife. He said she understands. He said she understands what he needs, and he said you have to follow him, and that's what I did, and it did. It helped him. So let me just say this: it's important to be on one accord when it comes to raising your children. You can't veer off of what the other partner thinks is best, and if you don't think it's best, then you have to talk about it. But you just don't go off what I call go off the range and do what you want to do. Okay, so and I think that did help uh, Ryan because we were consistent and we were on one accord as far as his education is concerned.
And I guess that's why we so tired now. They wore us out. They wore us out. And I never knew Mr. Rice said all of that. Because if, to put it in perspective for me, he was a great friend to both of us.
Yeah.
But you know how you have those friends that you don't know where they stand on certain things? So when he says something like that, it's like, wow, that's
Yeah.
deep.
Yeah.
Not that he wasn't a deep person, that or is a deep person. He does drop knowledge from time to time whenever you have a conversation, and he always gives a different perspective from what anybody else is thinking. So that part of him being our friend, I really enjoy because you never know what's going to come out of his mouth. It's never derogatory. It's just different.
That's correct.
So, though we enjoyed New Jersey, things were changing in our lives, and we got the opportunity to relocate to Maryland. It wasn't California, but it was an adventure to a place I really learned to like when I visited Paul while he was in law school. So, we did a little research and found that Paul could transfer two ways. One was the regular route, which could take years, and the other was a hardship transfer, where his family could move first and he would be transferred as soon as the position was available. So we chose the hardship route, packed up Jersey, and moved back to Brooklyn for a bit till the place we were moving to would be ready. It was our time in Brooklyn that I figured out, regardless of what anyone thought Son One was going to do, he was going to make it in life. While there, I worked with a little more with my aunt at the church she attended to make a little money before we moved to Maryland. As I said previously, Auntie C was the cook of the family. On one of the days we were working, she cooked over the weekend, and I asked if there was any mac and cheese left. She said there was, so I let her know I was going to get some wings from a Chinese restaurant to go with it. There was no fried chicken left. Bummer. So I went next door to order, not realizing someone had followed me out. So I returned to the church and helped my aunt pack up for the day. As we were doing so, I realized that Son One was nowhere to be found.
And this was actually quite unusual, for Ryan to not be near his mother.
Agreed. If I turned around, he was right there. So I walked through the church, which was quite large, as seen through a 7-year old's eyes. The janitor and family friend looked through the church as well. Then he walked around the block to see if he could locate him. I went to the Chinese restaurant, wings forgotten, to see if he was still waiting, not seeing me walk out. I'm not sure what happened to those wings. I guess somebody got free wings that day. My aunt stayed in the church in case he returned. When I came back and asked if she had seen him, she said no. It took everything in me not to start crying, but I knew if I started crying, my aunt would start crying and we would get sidetracked. So we called the police.
Oh my goodness. I'm so happy I didn't know what was on at that time. I probably would have panicked, had a heart attack or something.
Well, it wasn't for lack of trying because I do believe I called your job and you had left for the day, so
Mm.
you were in transit. And again, this is what 1997,
Yeah.
so cell phones were not popular like they are now. So I so the police came rather quickly. There were a lot of them. They went through the tracks we'd already traced. The officer in charge came back with the same results. No son won. After that, she suggested that we get into the police car and she would drive the route we usually walked home. As the officers drove, I looked on the sidewalk. There was one close call, but it wasn't him. So we kept going till we got back to my mother's home. When we pulled up, my husband was unlocking the door and talking to someone in the neighbor's yard. I was so relieved.
So you can imagine my shock when I see my wife getting out of a police car, uh, and I'm looking at my son in the neighbor's yard. These neighbors, he never played with those kids ever. So I'm saying, where's my wife? Where's Ellen? So of course I'm going to the door to see where she's at and to ask her why in the hell is Ryan playing with these kids over here. So then, as I'm thinking, I'm doing this self-talk. I see her. I see in my periphery. I see a white and blue police car, which is what those police cars look like in New York City. And I see my wife getting out of the car. So and then she's out the car and she's crying, and she rushes past me. And so I said, "Ryan, what's going on?" He said, He's looking at me like not speaking as usual and playing. And then I find out uh, that he had walked. She walked all the way from this church. Now, if anybody knows anything about where this church was and where he walked
From Flatbush over
Flatbush
by
by
Prospect
Prospect,
Park,
and then
Empire Boulevard,
Empire Boulevard, you guys,
up
y'all.
Bedford Avenue,
Yes.
up
So
no up Franklin Avenue.
Franklin Avenue, past Ebbets Field,
Yeah, past Evansville,
always, and then
to Eastern Parkway.
he walked across Eastern Parkway, you guys. How old was Ryan?
7.
7. He did this at 7. Okay. So go ahead, Ellen. I'll let you take
So,
it from there.
so as Paul said, I stepped out
And
of
remember, this was supposed to be a slow kid. Okay. Go ahead, Ellen.
I stepped out of the police car, and of course, my husband was shocked. He ran over and was asking what happened. I tried to tell him, but when I opened my mouth after 2 words, I just crumbled. The police officer had to take over. I'd never been so happy to see 2 people in my life. I later learned that my husband was opening the house door as he was talking to son one and asking him where I was, because he knew that there was no way our son would be playing in the neighbor's yard without me knowing.
Exactly.
However, our son thought I was in the house. After I pulled myself together, we went inside to call my aunt and mother to let them know son one was okay.
And let me stop here. I'm saying, if he thought his mother was in the house, why would you stop in a yard that you never played in? And why did you ring the bell?
He might have rung the bell. Could he even reach in there to ring the bell? Because my parents had a gate over the doors to the house. So I don't know if he could reach in, because you had to reach in behind a plate to ring the bell. So I don't know if his arm was long enough to do that.
Well, this is the thing. Let me just say this to everyone. I would had no other concerns after he made that trek from the church. He would be fine. No, I had no doubt. No matter what happened from that point on, I knew that he would be successful. I knew it. And he was 7. And you know what? No one else ever said that he was slow after that either. Never heard anything from his grandmother. I'm concerned about him. No one said anything after that. Go ahead, dear.
And as my husband, it took him a while. I think he was in shock, like after we made the phone calls. But after a while, he did kind of get angry with Ryan, because then he started asking them questions. He was like, "Well, how did you cross the street?" And Ryan was like, "I watched the other people. Like I went with the traffic." Because that was my other concern, as I was thinking about him and where the church was, these were all major streets that had to be crossed to get back to my mother's home. So I just, in a parent's eye, you just see the worst case scenario. But I should have known. Unfortunately, I did have family in Ebbets Field, so he might have walked over there because you never knew how much attention he was paying. But I was, as Paul says, once he did that, I was like, well, he's fine. Nothing's wrong with him. I don't care what the people say.
And when we moved to Maryland and he attended public school, there was a time when he was being bullied. And though he took karate, and we thought he wasn't really paying attention.
Yeah,
Go ahead, dear. But
yeah,
however, that one day we found out differently, didn't we?
yeah. And there were a few more times that solidified us knowing that he would be fine. So when we moved to Maryland, he attended public school because we weren't familiar with the area. I didn't have a car at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was easiest for him to attend public school. And there were times he was at public school that he was being bullied. And we did move him from one public school to another. And he still, and I'm guessing because he was the new kid, he spoke, I would say Baltimore has his own language, so he probably spoke a lot differently than a lot of the Baltimoreans.
Well, he didn't have the accent,
Yeah.
Baltimorean accent. So
He,
they knew he wasn't from there.
yeah, I would say they probably felt he spoke proper,
Mm-hmm.
and so he got bullied, and he took his work, and he was always. It was nothing that I did. Everybody's like, you made him all neat and clean. That was him. He would dress and have himself all buttoned up to the
Yep.
top, and have his. He was always
concerned
put
about.
together.
He always look. He's always clean. He always cared about his appearance. Never went out looking bad. That's one thing I can say about Ryan.
And that's to this day.
Yes.
So, because he was we didn't put him in karate because he was being bullied. It was just the activity that I had access to. Because remember, at this time, I'm a single parent, so karate was easy. I had met someone whose child was in the karate classes, so we would take them together, and I really thought he wasn't paying attention. So one day we found out he was, and one of the kids was bullying him in the cafeteria, and he did one of the moves to get the kid off of him. We found out later in the principal's office, though it was partly on me. I've told both of my sons when there was an issue in school to let the teacher know, and if they did not respond to handle it, it was they could do it, and the next time that we had that issue, had relocated to the suburbs, and the kid was bullying him once again. And he told me several times. I asked 2 times if he spoke with the teacher, and he said he did. After the second time, I told him, "You do what you got to do." And of course, I don't believe he got suspended in Baltimore.
No,
But
he didn't.
the thing that he did was, if you're familiar with karate, you have that kind of roundhouse kick. You can, like the high kick, and you can put it up under somebody's neck.
Mm-hmm.
And if you kick out, you can break their neck.
Right.
And that's what Ryan did. Now he was what, about eight or nine?
Yeah.
So, and my kids are not, you know, of my 2 children, Ryan is the most solid. He's never been a heavy child, but he's solid.
He's strong.
So if he'd have kicked that boy, he'd have broke him down. That boy would have ended up in the hospital. Thankfully, he didn't kick him. And of course, Paul came down because we both went to the principal's office, and the principal's like, "I can't believe that he would do something like that." I was like, man, my son has to get these people up off of him. You just gonna let him be abused?" And she was like, "Well, all of that was not necessary." I said,
well, she talked about him. Well, I guess they saw what he did. Another thing too, we forgot to mention that when we lived in Brooklyn, Ryan was taking this
Oh yeah, he was taking
Brazilian
karate.
martial
Yeah.
arts. And he took that too when he was in the with the church, with some of the kids in the church.
Oh, I
So
forgot about that
yeah,
part.
so he had that it was kind of like a mixed martial art, and he was what 6 when he took that, and then he took that karate when he got to Baltimore. So he was a dangerous little fella. We didn't realize that he knew all of that stuff. His mother was just putting him in to do something to keep him busy, and this is what I'm talking about with him being observant. He always been an observant child, pays attention to what's going on around him, and he was young, and he was always that way. But go ahead, dear.
Yeah. So when we relocated to the suburbs, our son was in middle school, and
Mm-hmm.
similar issue.
Yeah.
Spoken to the teacher, no response.
Right.
So I told my son that do what you got to do. If you
Yeah.
get suspended, we'll serve that suspension together.
Yeah.
Of course, sometimes these conversations did not take place in front of Mr. Mock.
Mm-hmm.
I think if he'd have been there, he probably would have tried to be more delicate. But I was not.
Ellen's a thug. Just say what you are.
I am not a thug.
I'm more.
He's more of the diplomat.
Yes.
I'm like, do what you need to do. And then, raising sons, I'm not advocating violence. But if you have a son, regardless of color, that reaches a point where they have to stand up for themselves, and if they don't stand up for themselves, they will always have that issue
Mm-hmm.
in their lives. So I did not mean for my son to advocate with violence. The second time was, and again, the second time was pretty bad. They cleared the hallway. They said, and so we get to school, and of course, I think my husband. The other thing my husband did not like is going to the principal's office with me, because he was like, "You're just like a loose cannon.
Oh my God.
You just say whatever you feel." I was like, "Look, yo,
No filter.
these are my children. I'm gonna tell them what they need to hear." So when we got to, I don't even think we told his grandmother about this one.
No.
So when we got to school, the principal was like, "Oh my God, he's such a studious child. He's so quiet." And my son is a very unassuming. He's not one to be violent. I can't believe that he just beat the boy so bad. It took several teachers to get him off of him. He was dragging them down the lockers. They cleared the hallway. He was dragging them down the hall.
And
And I was like, "Oh my God."
and I just had to feel this was something that was pent up. This one boy I think had really been harassing him. But of course we don't justify violence, of course. All right. And later we'll have a disclaimer concerning this podcast, but this is not the time for that yet.
Yeah. But it was.
And there are instances. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
There are instances where it may be better to walk away.
Yes.
But in this instance, that wasn't the case, because this was a situation that was going to continue to happen had he not, what the young people say, put his 10 toes down and stand up for himself. So this is an instance where he had to, in order to stop it, because it was just continual.
Because I think because our son did boys and girls after school, and I think the kid was in his class.
Yeah.
So I think he was bullying him in both places.
Yeah.
So I think that's what happened.
Had enough.
So, and of course,
and I would shake my head once we were when we in that principal's offices. This wasn't the only time I had to be in the principal's office because of one of my children. And my wife, she would say what she had to say. And did I mention that I worked for the school system?
Not then. Did you work? Not at that point.
Oh, no, when he was in middle school.
No,
right?
Not when he was in middle school.
Oh, well, that's another conversation about
our
nephew. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting the kids mixed up.
So,
yes.
after a meeting with the principal, I think she just kind of huffed and looked at me, because she knew that she was not going to change my mind.
No.
And just as I've told you, audience, there's a time when all boys, I'm not to say that they have to become men, but they have to stand on something. Otherwise, people will just keep picking at them.
Yeah.
So Yeah, and I told the principal, I said, "Well, if you're gonna suspend them, suspend them." They're like, "Well, Mrs. Mock, that's not the solution." I was like, "Well," I said, "the solution was when my son told the teacher twice that this was happening," and she was like, "Well, why didn't you contact me?" I said, "He talked to his teacher twice."
Yeah. So
So
it
when
was
he came to me the third time, I was like, "You do what you need to do. I'll meet you in the principal's office."
so I'm speechless.
So my husband, most of the time, when we were in the meetings together at the principal's office, he would just look and just shake his head. And the principal, I think this particular, I think she turned red. And I think when my husband did transition into teaching in the school system, she was one of his bosses. And I think sometimes
She was a big
people
time
that
boss.
people that have met me, they look at me, they believe I'm a lot younger than I am,
Yeah.
and they think that if some type of uh I won't say ignorance, but some type of certain conversations are going to be had, that if you looked at the both of us, it would be my husband, that I would be the more articulate one. But when it comes, I'm a tiger mom when it comes to my kids. You are not, I don't care who you are, going to take
I
advantage of my children.
the word articulate, I would say, yeah, that's true. But also, you probably would have. They probably looking at both of us. They probably would
One
say
more
that you would be the
polish.
calmer one.
Yes.
You'd be the calmer one, and well, because a lot of times when black men are in certain spaces,
Yeah.
there's a lot of assumptions made. Sometimes even when black women are in certain spaces, a
Yeah.
lot of assumptions made, like assumptions made about you. The fact that you look, because you're young looking, you black, you may not be as knowledgeable as you actually are, and so, uh, and we know you've been in several different spaces where that happened to you, and it was a total. There was I call it a, what do you call it, a miscalculation on their part to think that way. So that happens. It's unfortunate, but it happens. The
Yeah. So after, so as we were meeting, the principal at this particular time, there's all they. I'm not sure when it started, but there started to be a violence, no tolerance for violence policy in the
it didn't matter
Frederick
who
County
started
Public
it, who
School.
initiated. They both suspended.
At the
The
my
initiator,
son, my son at that particular time, they were just starting it, so I think he got 2 or 3 days.
3.
And I'm not sure what the other person got because they don't let you know what
They don't
happened.
tell you.
But because he was at the beginning of the that process, kids didn't always get suspended because of a violent act. But as time has passed, Mr. Mock will tell you, as soon as you draw back, up, out.
Yeah, sometimes we're not. They're not tolerating it.
So
But I mean, as you know, the thing is, there was never any other incidents after that.
no, after those two
No
incidents,
more.
no more, because it was understood. You can roll up on them, but you might not roll
Right.
back out.
So I was pleased that that was it. There was no more incidents.
Well, there was another one, but it
But
wasn't fighting. It
but it
wasn't
wasn't a
violent. Yeah,
fight.
right. It wasn't a fight.
That's for a different
And
podcast.
that's for a different podcast.
Yes.
Well, that concludes our discussion about Son One, and when we knew that he was going to make it, and to this day, I'm not sure if I think we've mentioned it before. Son One, he's been married for over 10 years. He's been teaching in the public school system for over 10 years, and he's gonna love me for this. He's working on his PhD, and I can't wait for him to finish because I tell him, I said, I can say, "Ooh, I have a doctor," and he's like, "Mom, stop."
And I can say he got his bachelor's degree from University of Loyola in history, and then he has a master's in teaching from Loyola as well. So we are very proud of him, particularly
Yes.
being the older son. He was a very good example to his younger brother, who we'll be talking about in another podcast. He was an excellent example. So we are
Yes.
very proud of him.
And he's also married to a lovely young lady who is has her doctorate
Mm-hmm.
in psychology. So
Clinical, I think it's clinical
clinical
psychology. Yeah.
psychology.
So we
So
are very proud. Her name is Cindy, and we are very proud of her as well. I think he made a good choice in picking who his helpmate is, and that's another time for another podcast too. A great helpmate, a great wife, very important. So we're going to read our disclaimer. Okay.
mhm.
We are not. I want to make sure we let everybody know we are not therapists. We're just hoping to help others through our crazy love story.
And we do not advocate violence
No,
of
we do
any
not.
shape or form.
We're just talking about our experiences with our children in this particular, in our lives. I want to give a shout out to everyone who took a few moments out of their day to listen. We hope that anything you heard was helpful.
If you want to do something, donate your time, talent, or funds to a cause you feel is worthy, or just send a note of thank you to someone you know working hard at whatever it is that they do and making lasting change in their field. And if you feel so moved, please check out our merch at our Etsy store, Ease Tees, or you can use the Linktree link, which will be included in the information for the podcast. You can also go on to Amazon and locate Mr. Mock's book, Vignettes of a South Central Sun by Paul G. Mock, if you'd like to read something interesting.
Thanks for joining us this week on EsaysPsays, your weekly dose of Black love. Check us out on our social media platforms: Facebook, EsaysPsays, Instagram at EsaysPsays, TikTok at EsaysPsays, YouTube at EsaysPsays Live, and on X at EsaysPsays. And make sure you subscribe or follow our podcast on your preferred podcast platform so that you don't miss any of our episodes. And feel free to leave any questions or comments on one of our social media platforms. See you next week.